be showing you our research, analysis, and solutions for our wicked problem, immunizations versus individual rights. I'm Abby Esposito.
I'm Kristen Goodfellow.
I'm Leon Camofield.
And I'm Kyle Edwards.
And today we're going to jump right in with Leon kicking us off.
So, as I mentioned before, the first vaccines were created by Edward Jenner in the late 1700s in Great Britain. And the vaccines he made, rather the vaccine he made is not quite what we think of as vaccines today. He used cowpox to inoculate people against the much worse disease, smallpox, which greatly helped in the eradication of smallpox from the planet. And it did not take very long after Jenner for the controversy surrounding vaccines to start. People almost immediately criticized that people were putting foreign objects into the bodies on purpose. People were using religious reasons against it. And also, amusingly, because cowpox comes from cows, there were people who were concerned that they would be turning into half-human, half-cow hybrids, if that makes any sense. It probably does not make any sense. And, of course, that one is no longer thought today, even though many other reasons are the same today. And another thing that we've mentioned several times is the Andrew Wakefield study over the MMR vaccine. He had 12 children use the vaccine, and of the 12, 9 developed autism, and all 12 actually developed some sort of developmental issues. And people saw the rates of 75% and 100% and freaked. They did not see, however, the hard data that it was only 12 children were taken in the study. So that caused a great deal of people to have what would be unneeded, to panic that would otherwise have been unneeded. In fact, to have another study that was going to be published, Jenner originally tried to have his findings published and studied in a journal, but because he only had one test subject, his own nephew, he was turned down because the editor of the journal was concerned that one test subject would not be anywhere near enough. Other important vaccines that have come down through history have been from, some of the others have been from Louis Pasteur, who primarily worked with animals, and therefore most of his vaccines were with animals. And I don't quite mean that he used cowpox the way that, and some of his diseases the way that Jenner did. He inoculated animals. That's what he did, mostly. And his primary contribution in the world of vaccines, aside from the vaccines, most notably rabies, is that he actually coined the term vaccine in honor of Jenner, and Jenner using cowpox as vaccine, which is why I forget what language it is, but the VAC essentially means cow. Next slide. So, of course, because people have been concerned since vaccines have been created about the effects, the laws needed to step in at a couple times, and the first laws acknowledging vaccines were made in the mid-1800s, and as I put down, the first vaccine requirements were for Boston public schools, and this again was in the middle of the 1800s, so the vaccine laws do go back, not quite to the beginning of vaccines, but farther back than one might think. And even though there were laws written, they had loopholes written as well, most notably the religious exemptions and the philosophical exemptions, which means people saying, I don't quite believe in vaccines, therefore I'm not going to have vaccines in my family. And for a time this was okay, because of this idea called herd immunity, which means that if enough people have taken the vaccine or are in some other way already inoculated against the disease, then that means that the disease won't spread as much. However, there were too many people who were taking advantage of the exemptions. There may have actually been people who took advantage of religious exemptions who weren't actually religious. And this, of course, destroys herd immunity, which can result in outbreaks. There are other people who figure that everyone else is going to get vaccinated. Why should I? Or why should I vaccinate my children? And that also, well, there's community, especially if everyone's thinking that way. So in recent years, many of the exemptions, save for the third kind, the health exemption, have been removed. The health exemption is essentially that there are people who cannot be vaccinated because they are too weak and their immune systems are not at all strong enough. So to even give them a dead copy of the virus or a weakened copy of the virus can be too much for them. Slide, which is behind. And vaccines are not cheap. In fact, the CDC estimated in 2016, so earlier this year, that to have all the recommended vaccines for a person under the age of 18 would cost upwards of $1,500, which granted that's just the recommended vaccines, but that is still a number of vaccines, many of which are required. And that does not take into account the annual flu vaccine. That's just the MMR vaccine, HPV, anything that would be on. There are another one, but I can't think of them right now. So to offset these, health insurance companies have, well, some of them willingly and some unwillingly, have offered help in paying for the vaccines. The Affordable Care Act requires that every health insurance plan has something with vaccines in it, and it's just that it's there. So health insurance companies the plans do range from helping a little to helping a lot, and also, so that will offset the $1,500 by a significant amount. However, just because you can pay for vaccines doesn't mean you can necessarily find them. Most pediatrician offices will have vaccines, as will many pharmacies. And I only looked for CVS, but according to CVS's own website, they only have many clinics in about 35 states. So they're not CVS mini clinics everywhere. So that probably means that you can't get a vaccine in every state from CVS. Granted, I could not find anything for where Rite Aid's version of the mini clinic is, and there's not much information out there saying how many pediatricians I could find. But there's anywhere. But if it's anything like with the mini clinic, there's a great deal of the United States that has no access to vaccines because there's just no vaccines to give, or no one to give them. And now to go further into laws and requirements, we'll leave Kristen.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about how immunizations affect directly sports requirements, parental issues, and how they feel about it, and just basically some of the unknown information. Okay, so how outbreaks and disease play a role in sports. So first, an article published by Schuchat, I don't really know how to pronounce that, was about high contact sports, and the article was called Skin and Sports. So basically this article touched on how high contact sports such as football, wrestling, not so much women's lacrosse, golf, those are like low contact sports. So basically how high contact sports can really affect us and we may not know it, such as sharing a towel to something as major as an open cut that isn't treated. So refusal of requirements and the parental perspective behind this. Many schools have established a immunization requirement called the pre-matriculation immunization requirement law. And this law is, some universities and some schools have it, and basically it's to inform parents how exactly immunizations work. It's to kind of set rules so immunizations become more popular, because rates obviously right now are lower, and they differ from year to year. So this is basically to kind of let parents know really what's going on. They get swayed by opinions a lot, so this is put in place so before joining a school or a university. And benefits of the athletes in this particular reason is to kind of, for their safety, so everybody, if you want to play a sport, you can, and not have, that laying on your shoulders a little bit, worrying you. And so basically they get a better view of what vaccines do and immunizations. Okay, so international sports. Every country is different. We know this, behind research. There is a lot of countries who require different, if you want to enter the country, there's different rules that go behind it. So the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, this information was found by Hunt. This is basically the CDC teamed up with international organizations to prevent diseases. Now this is really important because we all know Olympic sports, if a team travels over to a different country, there's a lot of infections and unknown information that we aren't really aware of. So the CDC paired up with international organizations in a way to kind of prevent these and let people know the risks in entering different countries and what may happen and what could show up later. There's a lot of unknown things that other countries have, yellow fever, a bunch of other things going around that we aren't fully aware of because these things aren't really spread here. So mass gatherings in international sports is a big problem. Now this was some information found from the World Health Organization by Looker and Kelly, and an article by Al Quanti, I don't really know how to pronounce that. So, but basically this organization talked about how huge professional international sporting events is really dangerous, and we may not be aware of that. So mass gatherings basically are just for the Olympics as an example. At the Olympics, there's people from many different countries and cultures and who come over, and they're all at the same event. And this kind of exposes us to a lot that we don't have here, and it can carry over. And if a lot of people aren't fully vaccinated and they're coming to these events and they're passing around things that we aren't vaccinated for, and we catch it and then we bring it back here and it spreads, and that's how outbreaks occur. So it's really unknown the information that is behind international sporting events and how dangerous they may be if the protocols aren't properly taken. So this is a map of the vaccine injury compensation. So basically, you may not be able to see it too well, but these are some places who have this law in place. So basically what this is if you get a vaccine and you're later experiencing something going on with your body, or you get injured because of the vaccine, or whatever may happen, and something happens to you and it affects your health, they basically cover it. So this was by Looker and Kelly, is where I found this map article that they published. And so basically this is just spreading awareness, and if you look at the dates, it's kind of hard to see because it's so small. But there's years from 1970 when somebody established this to 1994, so you can see that there's big gaps in these years that people put this compensation or injury compensation in place, which kind of affects us because, it's a lot of unknown information behind all of these problems. Okay, so importance behind this issue, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they reported that this decade was going to be the decade of vaccines, so they want to work on spreading awareness around everywhere, how important vaccinations are, especially, in sports, and how dangerous it is, and, we're traveling all these places, and we're not really aware of what is going on. So immunization rates, an article by Laskowski talked about a lot how immunization rates differ year to year. Some years they're a lot lower, and that is due to parental issues and how schools, universities, and even places across the world are not setting laws and protocols and guidelines for getting immunizations, which is really affecting us in the long run. And then suffering countries, we tend to think if they're getting by, we can get by too. If these suffering countries who can't have vaccinations are living and they're healthy and they're going by day to day, we tend to think, okay, since they're doing it, we can do it. So we may not know about this vaccination, so we're not going to get it. When in reality, going to survival rates, closing it out by an article published by Klein, talked about how survival rates in suffering countries, how we tend to try and get by on very low vaccination rates and immunization problems, and we can't any longer. The survival rates are increasingly going up with vaccinations, so it's a little confusing on why we don't get them. And this goes from lack of information. We see things on the media, or we don't know exactly what these immunizations and vaccinations include, so we're scared. And Colin's going to take over and talk to you a little bit more about vaccinations.
Hi, so my name is Colin Edwards, and I'll be talking a little bit about kind of the science side, research-based aspect of immunizations and in our topic. So just to kind of start off, how do vaccines work? What you're going to see is the CDC recommends, per their schedule, is that children by the ages of 6 years old are required, per their schedule, to have 49 doses of 14 different vaccines. If you follow that same schedule to when they're 18 years of age, they'll have 69 doses of 16 vaccines. So they're only acquiring 2 more vaccines in those years, generally influenza and a few other more things. But what they're going to be, those doses basically referred to as titers or boosters, are going to be re-administrations of the similar vaccines they've already taken to build up their immunity. So what that's going to do, in a study done by Barola, and these statistics are given by the CDC per the time period, but in 1983, at age 18, per the CDC, you were only required, per their schedule, to have 11 doses of only 4 vaccines. So you can see through the years from approximately 1980 to about 2005, when most of this research was conducted, you're going to see a drastic change. There's been a lot of research done. That's going to come into funding, research abilities, and availability of vaccines. So then just to kind of, before we get into the real gist of it, really what do vaccines do? How do they work in your body? So the main goal is you're immunizing someone, you're creating immunity. So your body's immune system responds to antigen or foreign bodies by several different mechanisms. One of the biggest one is going to be your antibody production. So these antibodies in your body, there are several different classes, 75% of which are made up of what's called IgG antibodies, or immunoglobulins that are designated. They have certain receptors that bind to a certain structure. So that's going to come into play when we talk about the structures of vaccines here in a little bit. So your antibody reduction is going to be basically a part of your innate and your adaptive response. And then the acquired immunity is going to come from memory cells. So when your body produces antibodies for a microbe or for a virus, what it's going to do is it's going to produce extra so that there are still some in your body once the virus is gone. That way that your response time, the next time you might get exposed to a virus, you have a quicker response. Upon initial time set, your initial response as far as your immune system can be upwards of 3 to 5 days for any microbe. So what that can be, when you produce these memory cells and antibodies that are now present in your body, that can limit that down all the way from 2 to 4 hours. So your secondary response is going to be a lot quicker than your primary response. So just to talk real quick about the types of vaccines, live attenuated and inactivated I have started at the top. We'll come back to those in a second. So then the other 3 I have are toxoid, subunit, and conjugate. So what these are these are the main types. The 2 at the top are the 2 that you're going to see commonly between your standard immunizations, ones that we all commonly have. The ones at the bottom are going to be more for specialty. If you're going to a certain area, you might have a specific type of vaccine. So toxoid, basically, there are certain viruses that produce toxin releases inside your body. These are going to mimic those toxins, and they're going to create an antibody response. The subunit, they're going to contain only certain pieces of a microbe or a virus. These are going to be pushed into your body. They're going to be exposed to your body, but they're only the certain pieces, so it's not the entire microbe. This is nice because then you don't have to give the whole microbe to an individual, and it's a lot less risk. But they're just the necessary components to elicit the immune response. So then you have conjugate, and that's going to contain several different. You can actually have up to 20 different pieces in some vaccines, where they'll have multiple components that do different things. So you can have up to 20 pieces all doing different things all at one time in one vaccine. So that's a conjugate vaccine. These are, like I said, these are more for specialty vaccines. If you're traveling to an area specifically where there's high exposure rates of certain microbes or viruses, these 3 at the bottom are common. So your 2 at the top, we have live attenuated and inactivated. So live attenuated is going to be a dead virus. What that means is by radiation, it's going to be, the virus is dead. So it's actually the virus, but it's going to be a common strain. It's Pontianum. And then the inactivated strains are going to be eradicated by radiation and or anything else. There's several other methods that they can use to make the virus so that it resembles the structure of the microbe of the virus that they're trying to create antibodies for. And like I said about that structure, antibodies respond per the structure of the microbe. So that's how they identify. These two at the top are the most common, and they produce the strongest immune response. So that's kind of the process behind those. So those are the most desired as far as that's why we commonly use those in vaccinations. So as far as the research goes, what has research found through the years? There's a lot of extensive research that goes through. There's only certain amounts of money that allow us to do certain amounts of research. It is very costly to do vaccine research, and there's also a lot of ethical questions that are raised to do vaccine research because there are risks, and then it comes into moral and ethical decisions, and there's a lot of other things that play into it. So this is a chart. It's a little bit hard to see, but what you're going to see across here is on the first side you have the vaccination rates from the 1980s prior to when vaccines really bloomed. What this is going to show is the prevalence rates of most vaccines. Per 13, there's only 10 represented here, but this was a study done by Roosh and Murphy. It was documented in an article by Max Rozier titled Vaccination, published by Our World magazine. So what this is going to show is here in this column, you can see the prevalence rates after vaccines around 2005 and 2006. So what that's going to include is that there was a 98% reduction rate in cases of vaccines of measles, mumps, tetanus, diphtheria. These are your common vaccines combined with the MMR vaccine and others. There was a 96% reduction just in the cases and a 99% reduction in deaths related to these diseases between those time periods from 1980, before vaccines were really big. So then you're going to see other things. Polio virus eliminated from the U.S. Smallpox, as Leon touched on, eradicated completely from the world. So there's several things that vaccines have accomplished over time, and there's a lot of extensive research and that goes into all of these things. It's going to show the progression rates from like about the 1980s when they really bloomed until about 2005 and to now in 2016. So what are our solutions? What are we going to do about it? What can we change to improve the research, improve publication and things like that? And that's the biggest thing with research. One, research is not very easily accessible today. We do have common sources of multimedia and things like that. However, researchers don't do a good enough job of putting it in an easy environment for people to read. And also, not very many people want to read it. Scientific research papers are very dense. They're not very interesting to read per se. So over time, we've relied on the media to convey these opinions and this research to the public. And so what we've done is, so not only do as researchers, we need to put our research in a more accessible place and easy for people to read, but we also need to rely on the media to relay this information in a proper manner. And so what we see, I mean, the FCC regulates the standards as to which they are required to do research and have verification and things like that. And so we've seen some decline, which Abby will touch on here in a little bit. But being able to have the media represent our research in a way that is correct and do extensive research to make sure they're providing the correct opinions so that people aren't getting skewed. As Leon touched on also was the Andrew Wakefield study. When it hit the media and it went worldwide very, very quickly, and there wasn't a whole lot of look into depth, the detail. So Abby's going to touch a little bit more on how the media can impact the opinions and the viewpoints of vaccines in children.
Hello everyone. You've heard me talk about the media in so many different capacities throughout this semester, and I promise I'm bringing it to the final ultimatum. So after all my research into this, what we're going to do today is we're going to explore how the loss of message pluralism in the media affects people's views of immunizations. Kind of something like this. So I think what a lot of us forget is media is an industry just like anything else you find in manufacturing. Hence, it plays by the same rules as capitalism. The way media is very sneaky about playing this happens through two main ways. The first would be concentration of ownership. According to Bengani, who is a media communication researcher who's been working at this for over 20 years, she defines concentration of ownership as the current trend of large companies buying smaller companies so that fewer companies own more types of media business. And of course, we've seen this in anything else. It's one of the tried and true ways to get rid of your competition anywhere. So I'd like to move on to the second, which is conglomerates. Conglomerates also feed into the erosion of our common media, and they do this because these are companies that own media companies as well as businesses unrelated to media. So that sounds kind of confusing. Let me enlighten this. That is Sony Pictures Entertainment owning Sony Electronics and all the versions of PlayStation. It's something sly that happens all the time that many of us don't notice. It's also present that Disney World owns ABC News and even more, and ESPN, some things that go under the radar, but all kind of run on that same course of agenda. So Bengali describes all this happening, that it's a melting of communications that's through the computer, internet, and any electronic sources such as gaming consoles I think many of us tend to overlook, that kind of make all of this information run together and gives us less chances to hear diverse media and diverse stories. It's something that happens so subtly, many of us don't even recognize it. And until I came across this research, it kind of shook my mind how much this happens and we don't really recognize it. So with less media companies in play, with more companies buying up other ones, we have less media diversity. And what it all boils down to is we have a loss of message pluralism. Now, let me define this for you. Message pluralism is the availability to an audience of a variety of information and entertainment sources. It sounds something so little and so kind of, who cares whether or not I see 5 stories on the latest crime or only 2. But by not getting more angles and more diversity in the media, it impacts our sense of reality and perceptions way more than any of us would like to admit. So, moving on to this really fascinating study I've mentioned before from the Pew Research Center. It's called Old Media, New Media, and it was done in 2014. So you can imagine these numbers have changed a little bit, but fundamentally the same thing is occurring, if not on a larger scale. What that found was that 31% of mass media companies admitted to disregarding scientific research if it did not align with its own agenda or its advertisers' agenda. So just thinking about that information in itself, it's really startling to me. This is considering that only 31% of these mass media companies are admitting to letting this information never be published or disregarding it in whole. So imagine how many mass media companies are actually disregarding this powerful information we need to know that's never getting to us because they just aren't admitting to doing it. Another scary thing to think about is that according to the study, 87% of United States citizens regard anything in the media as true. First of all, that's a ridiculously high number that scares me. But putting this into perspective with immunizations, out of that 87% are parents with children who are making these decisions, whether it's about immunizations or any other healthcare decisions they're going to face in their lives, that they're being impacted by such a powerful force that admits to not putting the correct information out there. To me, that is incredibly startling and something that definitely needs to be addressed. Godwin, another amazing communication researcher, explains that although the majority of parents understand the benefits of immunizations, and most of them support its use, many have vast misconceptions given to them from the media about how vaccines truly work and what are their effects. This erodes their confidence in the healthcare system. Something else important to bring up is the traditional model of our healthcare system has been changed to a consumer model. What this means is patients are no longer going straight to their doctors and taking their word as fact and believing it. Patients are being much more proactive and are going out and finding more information. However, most of them are not finding the information in the right places. They're allowing ill